I went to my very first football game, and I was blown away. You know, I had never seen anything like that at the intercollegiate level. I thought, wow, this is terrific. Now, what do we have for women? And I got the shock of my life. I was told, in no uncertain terms, women were not interested in sport. Well, that came as a complete shock to me because I had been competing since the age of 11. Here I was in the wealthiest nation in the entire world. And we had these wonderful opportunities for young men at universities. And when I asked about the opportunities for the women, they said, oh, they've got club sports. It was just accepted because girls and women didn't play sport. Well, I couldn't accept that.
Dr. Christine Grant, University of Iowa Women's Athletic Director, is a strong advocate of athletic opportunities for women.
You know when somebody walks into a room and everybody pays attention? Like everybody knows they walked into the room. That's kind of how it was with Dr. Grant.
She is a highly successful director of women's intercollegiate sports and a leader in encouraging both excellence in athletics and academics.
She saw what was possible when a group of really talented and smart people came together for a cause.
She loved to be able to have young women learn about themselves through sport.
Christine Grant has received innumerable awards. She was named to the World's Who's Who for Women in Education in 1977.
Christine Grant was a legend. She was a legend before she was a legend.
In '80, she was the Olympic Games judge in field hockey. '88, she received a Presidential Award for outstanding contributions to girls and women in sport.
Her commitment to making life better for men and women, but with an emphasis on correcting the wrongs that had existed for so long.
She has served as president of the National Association of Collegiate Women Athletic Administrators and the Association for Intercollegiate Athletics for Women.
And instilling in young women the desire to perform at the highest level.
Everybody that knew anything about women's athletics knew Christine Grant, and they knew the impact that she was having, not just on Iowa, but across the country.
Without her and her leadership and other women in that era, I wouldn't have the opportunities that I have today to be in this role.
Dr. Grant was really the pioneer of that, and you're kind of just feeling those effects as we move forward.
And she would always say, you know, if you love sport and you can survive what sport throws at you, then you can survive anything.
I mean, she was the one that was at the forefront of gender equity and Title IX.
She was inspiring, she was challenging, she was, well, she was amazing. And she led the effort nationwide to integrate legislation into the development of women's athletics.
Because my entire life had revolved around competitive sport. And so it was that experience that gave me the drive to try to change things.
Because we have nothing to lose and we have absolutely everything to gain.
My life, almost as far back as I can remember, has been associated with sport. It's been probably the most significant thing in my life. I started playing netball, which is really like six-player basketball. You remember that?
No, I don't.
And then I also played field hockey and continued field hockey right up until I was an adult.
Well, and she had started to play in Scotland, and she had early onset arthritis, which limited her play.
Oh, she was immensely proud of being a Scot, no question. It influenced everything she did, I think. Locations she actually visited and stayed, you know, be it Canada, Scotland, and finally the US.
What made you leave Scotland and go to Canada?
Well, The short version of that story is I was going to go to Germany. That's where my brother was. He was in the army, the Royal Scots, and I loved Germany. But the Berlin crisis happened in 1960, and I was a little bit apprehensive about going. Meanwhile, I had met the Canadian field hockey team when they visited Scotland and made friends there. So I decided rather than going to Germany, I'd go to Canada for a year. And that was how I got to Canada. I helped set up the Canadian Women's Field Hockey Association because we had pockets of field hockey across Canada, but there was nothing linking them together. And that was a wonderful experience for me to be involved in the ground floor of a new organization for women. And little did I realize that was going to stand me in good stead when I came to the States. I did my MA and PhD at the University of Iowa, and as I say, intended to go back to Canada. But then I was offered the athletic director's job in 1973, and I hadn't completed my dissertation, so I thought, well, I'll do this for a year or maybe a couple of years and get the program on its feet. But that was almost 20 years ago.
And here you are, 1992. What was it like for women in sport when you came and took over as the director?
In Iowa City? It was a culture shock for me because I had been the coach of the Canadian national team, and I was used to elite athletes, very highly skilled athletes, well-funded programs, and I came to the wealthiest country in the world, and I looked at the opportunities for men, and then I looked at the lack of opportunities for women, and I was astounded. It really shocked me.
Prior to Dr. Grant coming to the University of Iowa as a grad student and then becoming our athletic director, we at the University of Iowa had lots of club sports. Everybody across the nation had club sports. And so those types of competitions were going on, but they were more like play days. And then finally when Dr. Grant came and started as a grad student, she was seeing that there was competition for men, but no competition really for women, and that bothered her.
What could women do and not do in sport when you came?
Well, there were some sports that were acceptable. Tennis was acceptable, golf was acceptable, and that was pretty much it. And even then, women were not expected to sweat at all. You know, at the most you glowed. Well, you know, you can't aspire to be great and just glow.
There's no question that being looked upon as a female athlete was not something that was desirable back then. Definitely different than the men's program. Certainly we were second-class citizens, but I understood that.
The men had their own buildings, they had cars, they had scholarships, they had uniforms.
We weren't allowed in the lounge where the athletes were. We played our games, we practiced and played our games in the North Gym. We weren't allowed on the main floor in the field house.
You know, we all traveled in vans. There were, no buses whatsoever.
We were sharing uniforms with other teams that literally taking a uniform off and giving it to the volleyball team so that they could play later in the day. It was gross.
Everybody wore the same 2 sets of uniforms, whether you played basketball or field hockey or softball.
Now you try putting your basketball team and your gymnastics team into the same set of uniforms.
But when I was in high school, my softball team traveled 3 miles from the school to play on a church field while the boys got a nice baseball diamond. And when I was in college, the men traveled to Hawaii every 2 years to play in a basketball tournament, and we never took a trip anywhere.
I came from Iowa High School, where the girls' teams outdrew the boys' teams. And when I came to Iowa, nobody came to the games but our family and friends and a few fans. I understood that people would rather come and watch Ronnie Lester or Bobby Hansen than they would us.
We had to pay for our own food, we had to pay for our own travel. We had graduate students driving us in station wagons at 4 o'clock in the morning to travel to a game.
And we were not allowed in the very best facilities. They were reserved exclusively for men. And nobody thought anything much about it.
Your office, which was also in Halsey.
Yes, it was. It was in the kitchen in Halsey, which I thought was appropriate, really.
Little symbolic there.
Oh, the one that made me a feminist?
Yeah.
I'll never forget that. This is when I was a grad student in 1969.
When they built the recreation center here at the University of Iowa.
I mean, we were in desperate need of that. And so they decided that it would be paid for by student fees. Fine, fair enough.
She saw the plans for it.
And those of us who were in physical education went to this meeting. And they brought out the plans.
And the plans had the men's locker rooms in there.
No locker rooms for women, and no dressing rooms, no washrooms for women.
And she said, why are we not putting women's locker rooms in this new rec center that we're building?
So women were to pay for half of the building, but were not allowed to be in it.
Amenities in the building.
And they wondered why we were upset.
Because it was being constructed with student fees, of which half the population of Iowa were women. So the women were going to pay for this building, and they weren't going to be able to use it.
I mean, we just lost it.
Well, there are locker rooms in there now for women. Again, one of the things that she fought for, and struggles that you can't even think that this really happened? Like this was really going on?
You know, now I think about it and I'm like, wow. You know, at that point, we were grateful to get what we got, but that was, Christine was never grateful for what we just got. She wanted us to do better, and she wanted opportunities for women's athletics to be at the forefront, and not as an afterthought.
And she further understood that there was an entire process to get there, that it didn't suddenly, that people didn't show up and fill up the field house at that time or Carver at this time.
There was no opportunity for women in sports. We had to make our own opportunities, and that was part of the allure. And that's what drew a lot of my teammates to women's sports, that it almost became a cause, a political effort to make sure people noticed us and that we were paving the way for future generations to have the opportunities that we didn't.
You see, the athletic program officially started being funded by the university in 1973.
Sandy Boyd, who was the president of the university at that time, in '73 said, hey, we're going to start a women's intercollegiate athletics program. We're going to make it official, no more club sports. It's intercollegiate athletics for women.
She thought we were doing things. I never looked at it as a hard thing to do, but something that we ought to do. And so it seemed at that time kind of effortless. But we needed to be determined to do it, and we did.
We started then our women's athletics program with 9 sports, but it was very grassroots early on.
But they didn't have any place to put us. Mm-hmm. And so we had to make do with just squeezing out a space in the Halsey Gymnasium, which was at that time the women's physical education department. So we literally cut up the kitchen.
And you had, I read, no heat?
No heat in the winter and no air conditioning in the summer, and it was really bad.
That without equal opportunity, without the facilities, the equipment, the training, the coaches, the competition, without all of those things, you didn't produce a product like a Caitlin Clark that people are going to come to watch.
What I didn't understand, and what of course Christine Grant did understand, was that it was going to take time. I was very impatient. She understood that this was a longitudinal fight and she was in it for her lifetime, and I so respect that.
The timing of my arrival could not have been better, because here's the women's movement and the young women in colleges saying, why do we not have these opportunities?
Yeah.
Right. And you've forced me to look back. It's been very interesting going back and thinking through everything that happened. And little did I know, but at that time, the beginning of AIW was being talked about. And AIW came into being in 1971, which, I mean, could you have better timing than that?
No.
And then this other event, which I find still difficult to believe, Title IX was passed in 1972, which was in my opinion, one of the two most important pieces of legislation for women of the entire 20th century. I think number one would have been the right to vote, and number two would be Title IX.
It wasn't a law about athletics, but it was a law about higher education and how many doors it opened to women across the country.
Very simply, it was a federal law that said, thou shalt not discriminate against girls and women in educational institutions which receive federal funding.
It's part of the Education Amendments to Civil Rights legislation of 1964. Title IX was important because it opened access to opportunities for education. At the time it was passed, it was perfectly legal for a law school to say 450 of our 500 new students will be men and 50 will be female. Perfectly legal to do that for reasons of we think the men deserve those spots.
Prior to Title IX, women didn't have a lot of professional opportunities. You could be a teacher or a nurse or a homemaker or a secretary.
Nobody paid too much attention to it, really. But then, when it was discovered that it applied to intercollegiate athletics, suddenly it got tremendous attention.
If Title IX is a law that prohibits discrimination based on sex in educational programs that are receiving federal financial assistance, wouldn't that cover all of the programs or most of the programs? And the answer was yes. There was a realization then that Title IX also applied to athletics.
And never in the history of athletics have so few words instilled so much fear in so many people.
Of course, the challenges to Title IX came along very clearly with the two Tower amendments. The first, John Tower, senator from Texas, his first attempt was to exempt athletics from Title IX. That was defeated. Then he had a second amendment to exempt the revenue-producing sports from Title IX. And of course, that would have essentially dried up funding that would have supported women's athletics. And so I testified before Congress against that, before Senator Pell's committee. And that ended up, both of his amendments were defeated, of course, and athletics remained in Title IX.
So what we'll see throughout the 1970s after the law was passed is a huge growth in participation for girls and women at the high school, at the college level. We'll also see a huge backlash by many who thought, what will happen to men's athletics if we have to share power and resources? So for most of Title IX's existence, it's been a law about athletics because that was the most controversial part.
Athletics, while it's important to you and me, it's not the most important thing about Title IX because it's access to education that's the most important thing to Title IX. And I didn't realize that we were also discriminating against our girls and our women in their educational opportunities.
But it was really about overall access to education. And then in the most recent decade, it's also been very much about sexual harassment and preventing sexual violence. It's a law that covers 10 areas. Education, athletics, and sexual violence have dominated most of that. But really what it is, it's about giving access and opportunity and making sure we aren't discriminating based on sex.
You know, when you think back, and before Title IX, young women like you had to have higher ACT scores and higher GPAs than your brother to get into the same school. I mean, don't you find that hard to believe?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. So that's the most important thing about Title IX. And we've changed all of that. The changes to the educational system came almost overnight because it was so blatant. And now, I think it's about 55% of the undergraduates are now women.
That's true.
Which is, I mean, when you think 72, and here we are, not 50 years later, and it's all totally changed.
We were primarily involved in athletics, and much of the publicity around Title IX has been athletics. But I think it's important to remember that Title IX is much more than athletics, and so it's equally exciting to see the increased number of women in all the professions, whether it's law, medicine, whatever it might be, and the breadth of experiences that are opening up to women. I think it's unfortunate that so many times Title IX has been narrowed down to looking at athletics, and it has had much, much more profound effect on all of the areas of opportunities for women.
In 1971, the AIW was founded, and that is the Association of Intercollegiate Athletics for Women, an organization designed by women and for women. And it was founded primarily to create national championship opportunities for collegiate women student athletes.
Chris was a leader in the development of women's athletics. She was involved with the Association for Intercollegiate Athletics for Women, as were Dr. Peg Burke and Dr. Bonnie Slatton, also in the Women's Physical Education Department.
We both became involved quite early. It was organized in, I believe, 1971, and I think the first delegate assembly was in 1972, and she and I drove to that. I believe it was in St. Louis, and we discussed the issues all the way home. And so she was involved from the very early beginnings on that. I was the 5th president. Christine, I believe, was the 9th. You were president in the 70s. I was president in 1976.
The prime mission was to create national championships for female students, female student athletes, and to do it in a way that put the welfare of the student athlete as our top priority. No ifs, ands, or buts. Yeah. That was to be the top priority.
In order to offer championship opportunities to as many teams and as many students as was humanly possible. For that reason, it was built on a state, regional, and national basis. In other words, in most sports, each state would offer a championship. The winners from the state championship would go forward to the regional championship, and the winners from the regional go forward to the national championship. Thus, in 1980-81, which was the zenith of the AIW, there were actually approximately 450 championships run by the AIW throughout the entire nation.
It was very inexpensive because it was based on the closest schools, right? Rather than conferences. I was involved at the international level with the International Field Hockey Association, which was an all-women's organization. And then I was involved with the IW, an primarily all-women's organization, and discovered that when I looked back, that women designed sport in a different way than men. And some of these differences are very, very significant.
When she became the women's athletics director at Iowa in 1973, and AIW was starting to grow, and she would eventually become president of that at the end of the decade. I really believe it had not been for that organization, I'm not sure Title IX would have survived the 70s, applied to athletics.
The AIW elected its officers by secret ballot. That's still not done today in the NCAA. A student-athlete Bill of Rights never even has been discussed. But AIW student athletes had it. 20% of positions on the national committees were reserved for student athletes. 20% of all positions on national committees reserved for minorities. The right of appeal for any university in the country or any student athlete. Any decision made by the AIW could be appealed. It's called due process. Yeah. Do we have that today? No. Women refused to identify major sports and minor sports. We said we cannot control which of the public want to attend our events, but we can control how we treat every student athlete, and we will treat them in an equal fashion, regardless of what sport you participate in. I mean, these are significant differences, and we still have not been able to get these type of practices into the NCAA today.
The NCAA fought Title IX and tried to get rid of it as it applied to athletics. There was a huge backlash against the law.
During this decade, the AIW was on the flip side of all of this coin. They were actively pursuing a very, very strong Title IX.
It really was the AIW and those strong women leaders like Christine Grant and the other AIW presidents and those who volunteered for the organization that lobbied for Title IX, that fought for it.
In 1980, at the NCAA convention, the annual convention, there were 2 motions to start championships for Division 2 and Division 3 women. And we were told at that time that there would be no interest in starting Division 1 championships for women. These motions passed, and that was the beginning of the end. By June of 1982, the AIW was bankrupt, although they had filed suit against the NCAA for violation of the antitrust laws, and we did not win that suit. My thesis of what happened is that the NCAA, realizing it could not defeat Title IX, decided to simply take over women's athletics to achieve the same goal, which was control of expenditures for women's sports. I think the thesis fits.
I think at first it was not, it was a tie, and they adjourned the meeting and went out and lobbied, and when they came back, the NCAA won. But that was the lowest point that we have ever seen Christine. It just devastated her when that happened. Of course, it was a blow to all of us, but she was still so actively involved in it and so invested in it that it was one of the lowest points, I think, for her.
So I started my PhD work at the University of Iowa in 2004 and in the fall, and then by the spring of 2005 did my first internship with her, and then that just continued. We just stayed together, working together. As I worked with Dr. Grant, learned more about the AIAW and their history and how important that was to Title IX and the growth of women's sports. I got to meet most of the presidents and interviewed them and got a chance to spend time with them. I wrote my dissertation on the AIW, so it all kind of came together. And then I realized that Dr. Grant would often travel with Dr. Charlotte West, and they would team up. She would do the history of women's sports in Title IX, and then Dr. Grant would do the data. So Dr. Grant pulled away from doing the data, and I got to travel with Charlotte for a while, so we were the pair that would do it together. We stayed in contact during the time that I was a professor, and then we got to that point where, you know, I had the opportunity at the NCAA, and she said, go where you can make a difference, and so that's what I did. When I came to see her at her home in Coralville, she presented me with this jewelry box with these roses on it and said that she had something that she wanted me to have. And so I opened it on the spot and was taken aback. What was inside of the box is her necklace that I had never seen her take it off in the time that I've known her, and I believe she'd worn it for decades. This necklace is the AIAW, so if you see it, you can see the letters there, Association for Intercollegiate Athletics for Women. And this was the organization that she was profoundly proud of, having helped to be part of it, and also extremely proud of the other persons who were leaders in that organization with her and the impact that it had. I think it, in many ways, when I hold this in my hand, it represents her as the pioneer, and then I just think about all that she gave after the AIW and all that she's done to influence equity, not just in intercollegiate athletics, but more broadly.
Back in the early 1970s, there were 2 myths that we had to deal with throughout the entire decade. And the first myth was that women simply were not interested in sport. And they pointed to the high school participation rate, which was very, very low, and said, look, there is no interest in sport. Well, let me show you in the first chart what happened. Between 1972 and the 1990s, it went from almost 0 participation up to 2.1 million high school students.
Christine Grant taught me so many things. I think from a more practical standpoint, it was that you have to commit to having expertise in an area. You have to be the one in the room if you're going to stand up for something that knows the most about it. So you must always keep learning and be prepared. You can never be over-prepared.
But she really showed the way that you've got to back up what you're saying with facts. You can't just say this is wrong.
We have gone from over 90% women coaches in the early 70s to 47%.
But look at the difference between what's spent on men's athletics and what's spent on women's athletics. I mean, these are shocking figures.
Yeah. In men's sports at the collegiate level, 99.9% of the coaches for the men's teams are male. And let me show you some facts and figures. In Division 1A and 1AA, the biggest football programs, 62% are in deficit spending. that in 30% of our colleges and universities in the country, there is now no woman at all, no woman at all in athletic administration.
I discovered very quickly Title IX is a very emotional topic. A lot of people can't talk about Title IX. So I decided that I would use data, and I tried to keep my emotion to myself and let the data speak.
But you know, one area gets, to my thinking, very much overlooked, and that was her serving as an expert witness in numerous Title IX cases.
She had a very strong Scottish brogue.
Certainly her Scottish accent didn't hurt because people were so charmed by the way she spoke.
I've always thought I had a Midwestern accent.
Here she is with her beautiful curly hair and her big brown eyes and the Scottish brogue, and she looked so innocent, so sweet, and she was lethal, totally lethal.
And I think a greater understanding can occur between 2, 3, 4 very seriously minded athletes dedicated to their own thing.
And I don't know of a case that she served that they lost. If so, she was very close to 100%.
It wasn't very pleasant sometimes being at Big Ten meetings with the athletic directors.
She would go to the Big Ten meetings, the athletic director meetings, and they were all men except for there was one other female athletic director from the University of Minnesota.
First of all, some of them didn't think I should be at the table. And if I spoke, it was as if I hadn't spoken.
They would always take a picture of all of the athletic directors. And she and this other woman were asked to leave the room so they could take the picture. I don't know how I could have not exploded. And that's it. She was so good at fighting without being like abusive. I mean, I would probably just throw a tantrum right there, you know, and she didn't. She walked out of the room, she let him take the picture, and then she was in the picture, I think, the next year. So she fought her battles in the right way.
She was not afraid to stand up in front of a group of men, you know, who some scoffed at her and made fun. She was fearless. You know, it took gumption to stand up when you knew everybody in the room were gonna say, what a crock, you know, but she did it.
And then a man would say exactly the same thing 10 minutes later, and it would be greeted with applause.
Sometimes someone would almost, as we say, mansplain today, where they would just turn around and repeat what she had just said as if it was their own idea.
But, you know, I can't imagine some of the battles that she had to undertake.
Some of the comments were really mean-spirited, but you had to say, I'm doing this for a reason that I can accept those kind of negative comments and move on.
I was booed, but so were many other women. I found a caricature of me, which I wish I had kept. Yeah, it was a very difficult convention.
Did you wonder if you wanted to go on and...
Yes.
What?
Yeah. I still had quite a bit of support at my own university, and I just felt that I had the ability to speak out, whereas a lot of women didn't, and I should do that.
She just went to bat every single day working on that, and she really brought a coalition of people together and really started a movement.
Christine was the force, a very powerful force leading the charge.
She was fighting, you know, not only here at Iowa, but she was fighting at the Big Ten level, at the NCAA level, and then nationally, you know, in front of Congress to help define what Title IX really meant toward athletics. How did she do it all? I have no idea.
The opportunity to compete on the international stage was fairly unique to Christine Grant. And she used those kinds of skills to motivate people, to charm people, and to develop the entire women's athletics program at the University of Iowa.
We're really geared toward developing an excellent program.
But I don't think we're going to be very satisfied if we're just achieving excellence in athletics, because what ideally we'd like to do is produce an all-round person who is an excellent athlete, an excellent scholar, and an excellent human being. And that's a pretty high goal.
What do you think for you is the most crucial task as an athletic director?
Hiring the best coaches that I can possibly find.
I came to Iowa because of Christine. She was the reason why I wanted to come to Iowa. I could have easily stayed where I was. We were very successful at that point in time, and I could have easily have stayed there.
Dr. Grant is a treasure for Iowa, and there's a whole cadre of really amazing men and women who were doing this work in the 70s and 80s that were part of kind of her team or her circle that were just extraordinary.
It was pretty interesting. She would talk with athletic directors around the country, and she would say, well, do you think this particular person would ever leave? And they would say, oh, I don't think they'll leave where they are. She would call the next day and say, would you like to come to campus and have a discussion about being coach of whatever? And they would come, and they often stayed.
I was hired by Christine Grant to be the head field hockey coach in 1978. I coached from 1978 for 10 years. During that time, we had 7 Big Ten championships and 1 national championship.
When I was hired, I didn't really think about being the first paid women's basketball coach under Title IX. What it was just an opportunity for my very first job, a professional job, and I was just so eager to do well, and I just threw my heart and soul into it, not really recognizing the historic significance of it at that time.
Christine was the difference maker, and I wanted to know what it was like to work for someone like Christine Grant. And I can tell you, I was never, ever disappointed.
I felt like she shaped me in that she allowed me to be, and all of us really, just strong females, and to use our voice. She encouraged us to use our voice and stand for what we believed in.
Christine, for me, was just an ideal boss because it was a startup, so things are messy in startups. You don't know what you're doing, and you need somebody who will provide guidance, but not hover so much.
I can remember going in with some concerns about something that was not in place for the softball program when I came to Iowa, when I first came to Iowa. She sat very calmly and listened to my questions and concerns. And then when I finished, she looked at me and she said, and what's your solution? And I sat there just like I'm looking at you right now, and I had not given that particular question. Yeah, I had not thought about the answer for that, and I didn't have the answer. And so she said to me, I'm gonna send you out of here, come back and see me when you have the solution. I never, ever walked in her office again without a solution. I mean, she taught me a really important lesson, and I used that not just for myself, but I used that for lots of young coaches that I worked with and for the young women that I trained. That, you know, it's one thing to complain about something, it's another thing altogether to have a viable solution.
She allowed me to do what I needed to do with my program. She did not micromanage me. I felt that she trusted me to lead, and if I was going down the wrong path, I knew that she would come and let me know I was going down the wrong path. And sometimes it was stressful making those decisions, and then she'd say, yeah, you made the right one. And I'd say, well, why didn't you tell me sooner?
She had very good values that she stuck to, you know, values of respect, equality for all of the sports and all the people. She has expected success and hard work, but she didn't rule with an iron hand. She was just an easy person to work with.
You were the person who brought in Vivian Stringer. How did you come up with her?
Well, her college coach actually is a very good friend of mine. That helped. And when I had phoned about 10 of the top people in basketball around the country, asked for their recommendations for a top coach. Vivian Stringer was on everybody's list. And so I went after her. I went to Philadelphia, and in the first paragraph she said, if I move from Cheney, which is questionable, I will never move to a cold climate. And my heart sank. But I just kept persevering. I thought if I could get her to come to Iowa and visit the university, meet the people, and see the commitment that we had a shot. And that's the way it actually happened. She came here, she liked it, went back, thought about it, came back out again, accepted the job.
I won't say she stole some good coaches, but she was able to persuade people that Iowa was the place to be.
Vivian Stringer took over the Iowa women's basketball program after a brilliant 11-year stay at Cheney State College. There, she had won over 250 games, was honored as the National Coach of the Year, and coached in the very first NCAA championship game.
That's why the program is successful. It's because I have great people in the program. You know, people like Vivian Stringer, Gail Blevins. It's amazing that we've managed to convince people of that quality to come to the Midwest.
At the University of Iowa, the success of the women's basketball team adds to an already outstanding athletic program. Across the 20 men's and women's intercollegiate teams, one will find All-Americans, Big Ten Conference and NCAA champions, gold medal winning Olympians, and countless other team and individual success stories.
The rest of our sports actually aren't that far out of being top 20 across the board, so we're pleased with them. But there's no question about it. Once you get into the top 20, you start getting national coverage, and that's when your program takes off. You know, Vivian, the past 2 weeks, was in Los Angeles Times, New York Times, Chicago Tribune, Chicago Sun-Times, and that's just a few of the newspapers.
But what really makes the University of Iowa special is its commitment to women's athletics. With their own director of athletics, their own administration and support staff, Iowa offers not only a progressive winning attitude, but all the opportunities necessary for success.
The entire program is one of winners. When I talk to a young lady, I want to tell you about a football program and a basketball program and a wrestling program and a swimming program and a field hockey program, and it goes on and on and on. But beyond that, what makes it so great is that you have coaches who are in your corner.
Well, one of the most positive things about being here, and I think it's really important, was we always had access to scholarships. And we were in the vanguard, in the forefront of that for women's athletics throughout the country. And as you know, it's the players that are going to make a team successful.
When I came in to Iowa and Cedar Rapids, I was driving with Judith, and it was at nighttime. And, you know, Iowa City was all lit up and everything. And that night, I swear, I called my parents that night and I told them I was going to come here.
Being a part of the school is something special because the school is so important throughout the whole state. And even from where I'm from, the Hawkeye, in San Diego, the Hawkeyes are so known. You know, it's really incredible the amount of people that are into Iowa.
I had really such an amazing experience as a women's student athlete here at the University of Iowa, and mostly because of the culture that revolved around the student athletes and the coaches within women's athletics. It was a real family, and I would say that the leadership in the women's athletic department in 1992, when I was a freshman, made such a conscious effort to make sure that we were connecting with all the different athletes and all the different coaches. So from Dr. Grant's leadership, she really initiated a cohesive athletic department.
Basically, it's like having two families. A family away from the home and then the home family. We're really close, and we do everything together just like a family would. Only thing is this family consists of all females. So we are a family.
I was a complete beneficiary of that process that she went through, and I had tremendous female role models and awesome coaches that really helped me, you know, have a great experience, but then put me on my path to coaching.
When I was home over Christmas break, just this past one, a friend of mine came up to me and said, do you know that the women's basketball team is ranked #1? And I said, yeah, that's great, isn't it? And I was really proud because I know some of the players on the team, and it was really neat. And people take notice of that in my town. They look for Iowa in the paper now, and I think that's It shows how close the women's athletic program is and that we follow each other and know what each other's doing.
We were really, really unified in a lot of ways. And I think that we took pride in each other's success. And from 1992, when I was a freshman, throughout the 1990s, there was unprecedented success in Iowa women's athletics, with softball teams going to the World Series and Final Fours on the basketball team. The tennis team reached the Sweet 16 in the NCAA tournament for the first time. And I think a lot of that came from the synergy and the connection that we felt with each other, and the leadership that came from the coaches.
So for an 18 to 22-year-old, what was so fantastic for me and the sports culture that I lived in every day was that I had female role models in every single facet of our athletic department, because there was a woman leading compliance, athletic training, sports marketing, and the list goes on and on. So everywhere you turned, you could look up to someone to be like, I could be like her if I want to.
So Lisa and I were in school together. I'm 2 years older, but we were part of that group that really had great synergy and student athletes here that knew each other even though we were on different teams. And so also just a huge connection with Lisa. And for both of us to be back here and being head coaches was something really special to Lisa and I. And I think we also talk a lot about the pride that we feel on being able to coach at our alma maters and in a legacy of Dr. Grant.
This was a women's athletics logo that was adopted in 1974. And again, this was one of Christine's brilliant ideas. I mean, she wanted something that was that you could identify with the women's athletic department at Iowa right away.
That was really interesting because I knew it was going to be very controversial for some people.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really with our coaches. I mean, I think maybe some of them were surprised.
Yeah.
And I'm sure some of our student athletes were surprised. But there really was not that much negative reaction across the campus. But there was a lot of negative reaction outside.
And so she felt it was critical that we have something that was very identifiable.
I saw it as us being independent.
Expressing the forefront thoughts and theories and importance that Christine really wanted to get across. It was so important to be able to make sure that people knew who we were.
We took a real pride in trying to offer equal opportunities for our women's program. And I think our men, especially our male athletes, came to realize that that was a good thing for both programs.
And I should say, one of the things that gave her the most support was having the support of President Sandy Boyd and Bump Elliott, who was the athletic director, and Hayden Fry. They all, and especially in the early days, President Boyd and Bump Elliott really made it possible for Christine to do what she was doing. And they would take the message to the Big Ten level and help her get the message out.
And if it wasn't for like-minded thinking men, she wouldn't have been able to really accomplish what she did.
So their support was overwhelmingly the best support she could have had on her own campus.
That was when George Raveling was our men's basketball coach.
Awesome.
And I asked George if he would make a TV commercial for us, and he said, absolutely. And then 2 or 3 days later, I had Hayden at the door saying, why didn't you ask me? And I said, I'm asking.
Yeah.
Check, please. Well, coaches, who should we have as this year's Gold Card celebrity?
Well, it should be someone associated with excellence and photogenic and associated with Iowa athletics.
Excuse me, please. Hi, Hawk fans. I'm Jim Zabel, here to remind you to get your Gold Card by contacting Carver Hawkeye Arena for only $20. The Gold Card, your family season ticket to all Iowa women's sporting events. Well, when do I start?
The coach's check, sir.
Oh.
Get a Gold Card.
Nobody in the entire country had men's athletics doing that kind of supportive action for women's athletics, and yet we were two separate departments. And I think that gives you a flavor of how well we were trying to get along.
Yes. Then that's quite a remarkable history.
It really has been a revolution.
It has.
And in '73, I thought we were moving like molasses. You know, everything was so slow and changing. But now looking back and realizing how slowly society does change, it really was a phenomenal change that occurred in a very short period of time, because we changed society's attitude. We've changed it in 20 years, and that's quite an accomplishment to do that.
Support for the Hawkeyes can be summed up in one instance, when on February 3rd, 1985, in the Carver Hawkeye Arena, an unheralded, unproven group of young women made college sports history, drawing a crowd that was later termed a little bit more than a full house.
Christine had one of her brilliant ideas. She said, let's do this. Let's sell out Carver Hawkeye Arena.
We wanted to establish a national record, and we thought it could be done in Iowa, and we wanted to fill Carver Hawkeye Arena. Vivian, ever since she arrived, wanted to fill the arena.
The Carver Hawkeye Arena, the only collegiate athletic facility to be honored by the American Institute of Architects. Carver Hawkeye Arena has seating up to 15,500 and is considered one of the nation's finest college basketball arenas.
And so we set out to do that, and we promoted it like crazy. We had a lot of fun.
There was a 2-week campaign to do this. 2 weeks. And I mean, we hit the airways, the radio, I mean, everything. We did everything that we possibly could. And one of the things that we really focused on was, let's break the record. Iowa, you need to help us break the record. I think that was what really, the really big key. I mean, obviously, people loved Vivian. People wanted to support her.
And this was a young team. I mean, we had primarily freshmen, and we were taking on the number 6 ranked Ohio State.
One of my job responsibilities was event management, so you can imagine. So at 10 o'clock that morning, I was like, uh-oh.
The arena had not opened yet, and we had lines and lines and lines of people, and that was 10 o'clock, 3.5 hours before the game started.
And then they just started coming and coming and coming.
And about 2 hours before the game was ready to go, the arena was filled.
The police called. The highway patrol, we were trying to get everybody encouraged. We were trying to get everybody to, figure out what to do with this tremendous crowd.
We have the traffic backed all the way up to the interstate. You have got to get out on the radio, tell people not to come.
Didn't stop anybody. Everybody kept coming.
People were pleading just to get in, just to see a little bit.
So we may have opened up a few doors. We may have opened up, and encouraged lots of people to come in.
And so I relented and let people come in and stand around the concourse.
There were 6 people deep on the concourse.
And the concourse is a quarter of a mile, as you know.
There were people in every single stairway sitting. At one point, our announcer at that point said, and we were bringing out chairs, and everything, and the announcer said, folks, there's some chairs on the floor, and I was like, oh no. So we had a mad rush of people running down to get the chairs.
There's no question I can't express the kind of feeling that I had when I came out of the tunnel prior to our game and saw, every seat filled and the aisles filled, and with the fans standing up and giving the Iowa fight song. It just causes chills to go down your back and tears in your eyes when you realize that so many people care.
I mean, the response was unbelievable. I get goosebumps today, and this is about 6 or 7 years later, just really thinking about it.
We're trying to figure out exactly how many people we had in there. And we were counting people, we were clicking people as they were coming in and everything. So we had a number, and it was on a little tiny scratch of paper. Associate Athletic Director and I, Linda Hackett and I were looking at this and we're like, oh boy, and I'm thinking right away, I'm gonna get fired. This is gonna be my last event, working in women's athletics. So we had this scratch of paper, and Christine was in press row sharing a chair with our boss, Casey Mahon at the time. She was the VP for Finance. And Linda and I handed that scrap of paper to Christine, and she sees
22,157, an NCAA record that is expected to stand for years to come.
And she says, that can't be. That can't be. We can't have that many people in here.
22,000 people. That, incidentally, was not supposed to be announced.
And we're like, look around. We have 22,000 people in here. And she says, well, we can't announce that. Well, Linda and I had already decided we were fired. So we were like,
we announced it.
There was a miscommunication between me and the announcer, and it was announced because we had broken the fire code. And actually, the university was forced to write me a letter of reprimand the next day, which was fine. I framed it.
Yeah, you framed it.
I mean, we made every paper the next day because nobody believed that a women's game had drawn that way.
Because our fans are a type of fan that certainly appreciates a great effort. They're an intelligent group of people. They're family-oriented, and the pride that is here within the Hawkeye family is the blood runs black and gold, as simple as that.
I think the atmosphere at Iowa was really ready to accept this as a challenge.
I don't think I had an idea about the big picture until much, much later. And I was talking to Christine, and it was after the U.S. soccer women filled up the stadium in Arizona at the World Cup. She had such pride in that, and at first I couldn't figure out why, and then I started to think about it. I thought, of course she does. Of course she's proud of that, because filling up that stadium was almost entirely due to her and to her colleagues. And so that was when I started to realize the big picture that she had accomplished.
That momentum of young women coming out of colleges or going into colleges on athletic scholarships helps that Olympic movement, and consequently, you see a tremendous growth in women's sport throughout the world. And I do believe that Christine helped spark that.
I don't know if I can begin to explain the impact that Dr. Grant has had on our current team and since I've been at Iowa. I mean, everything from locker rooms to uniforms to the way that you travel to coaches' salaries to scholarships. I mean, we take for granted right now what we have too often because it wasn't like that. Everything that we really have going forward is based on Dr. Grant's foundation.
So there's been this huge growth, and I think that starts with the success that other women have. And countries and other Olympic committees see that. They want to develop their women's teams. And where did that start? That started in the colleges and universities. And where did that start? It started at Iowa.
A great university is one that inspires within its students a need to explore, to learn, to delight in discovering something new, and then to eagerly share that knowledge with others. The University of Iowa.
And of course, her influence on field hockey. I didn't mention that.
There would not be an Iowa field hockey program without Dr. Grant. You know, Dr. Grant was the first field hockey coach at Iowa, and then she hired the next four, Margie Greenberg, Judith Davidson, Beth Beglin, and Tracy Grisbaum, and all of those women followed in her footsteps and really, you know, had historic success and kept Iowa in the national championship conversation for 50 years. So I truly go to work every day to be a keeper of their legacy and to make Dr. Grant and the women that came before me proud.
Judith Davidson really started us off to become a powerhouse in field hockey.
I got the call, it was early in the summer, and she told me about the program, and I did not want to be a full-time coach. In fact, I didn't want to coach anymore. I was going to become a professor. And Christine was so positive and excited about the Iowa program that I said, okay, I will come visit. And as they say, the rest is history. I visited for 10 years.
I started playing field hockey in high school. At that time, it was sort of a private school sport in the Midwest. It was very popular on the East Coast.
I mean, we play a sport that's not sponsored in the state, and we've had a successful program for the last 50 years, and that's absolutely due to her persistence, her vision, and elevating field hockey to a varsity sport.
We were just accustomed to sending our student athletes to play for the national team. That just became part of our tradition, you know.
But I think she was just determined for it to be a lasting sport here. And she would see a student who was a good athlete in another area, and she'd say, come down and try out for hockey.
It was a challenging sport. It required strength and endurance and tenacity. You had to be a leader and a follower. You had to know your teammates and trust them, and you had to be willing to go full out in order to work against your competitors.
After my recruiting trip, I met the people on the team, and what really stood out in my mind about the University of Iowa's field hockey team is that they're so warm and they're so friendly, and it's not a fake put-on kind of thing. It's like you really belong there. We had a regional game, and we had a whole bunch of little girls come up to us and ask us for our autographs, and it just really makes you feel special, like you're really part of something important.
Been the head coach for 8 years, but I've been a coach within the Iowa field hockey program for the last 22 years. I did go to school here. I was a student athlete from 1994 to 98, and have the great privilege to be able to coach at Iowa for a very long time at my alma mater, which has just been such an honor.
I always try to not make it obvious that I love field hockey. I do. I just love it.
Because it's your sport.
It's my sport, you know. But I really tried. I tried hard to make every coach and every student athlete feel that her sport was important to me.
You did.
Because that's the way I feel about field hockey. You know, field hockey is a nothing sport for most people.
Right. Well,
you know, so I
Yeah.
know how people feel when they feel they're being totally ignored and rejected, and I don't want anybody to feel like that. But I do love field hockey.
I first met Dr. Grant in October of 1993. I was on my official visit for the field hockey program here. I was being recruited by the field hockey program at Iowa, and we had a scheduled meeting. And I knew who Dr. Grant was, but definitely did not know the magnitude of her until well into that meeting. When I first sat down, she really just started. I vividly remember being in her office, and she just started talking to me about how the women's teams at Iowa were thriving. At the time, I think softball was winning, going to World Series. Field hockey had been to the last 5 straight Final Fours. Basketball was just in the Final Four, and she was telling me what a priority every woman in the department was. And you could just tell the resources that they had at Iowa were different by having just a separate women's athletic department.
Coming in as a freshman, and there's kind of so much to take in, especially on the Iowa field hockey program just itself. There's so much history behind it, and Lisa kind of makes an effort to, the first day that you're here, like you're already endorsed in everything that's gone before us. Working through your 4 or 5 years, pushing yourself as an athlete to, get the championships, win those really important games, but actually it's so much more off the field. The work that you do, especially as women, they develop us, they push us to work harder in academics, to achieve, whatever we can during our 4 years at Iowa.
Field hockey players and all student athletes, I mean, they, at least our field hockey players, they understand that, they wouldn't be doing what they're doing at the level they're doing it and the manner in which they are if there wasn't a Dr. Grant or women like her. And I think, they're reminded of that every day, and we try to remind them of that every day as well, just to be able to have the opportunity to have an equally, challenging playing field to do what they're doing. I think that it's just such a huge impact.
We, as a program, our locker room, our field, the way we talk to each other, the rules we have set, the way we fight for certain games, the way we fight for situations off the field, everything has been surrounded by the way Dr. Grant has pushed for female athletes.
Unbelievable. I mean, I know her involvement and her support for our program has just meant a lot to countless field hockey members and former coaches for years and years. And really, since her retirement, when she retired in 2000, I mean, she rarely missed a home game. And if she did miss it or was gonna miss it, she left a voicemail or a real quick email to let us know why.
I still remember where she would sit in the stands. She had the same place every game, probably some superstition or something, but
it was a comfort and just really motivating to be able to know that this legend and this hero was there watching you. And she was always into wanting to make sure she introduced herself to the other teams as well when she came, because visiting teams would come to Iowa and they'd all want to know about Dr. Grant or have the opportunity to have their teams meet her, and she loved doing that. But it was just such a great comfort for us, and just such an honor that she was with us all the time.
To represent Iowa and wear my jersey, it was just such a sign of respect, honestly. It made me so proud, especially as a female athlete over the past 50 years since Title IX has been implemented. To step on the field every Friday and Sunday and play for Iowa was just meant something so much bigger than just myself.
How about having that field named after you? That's pretty special.
That was a very touching weekend, yeah.
What happened? What was the weekend like?
Well, first of all, I didn't know anything about it until about 3 weeks beforehand. The staff had done it, which really, that's the most important thing. As far as I'm concerned, it was the staff that did it.
The interesting thing to me about Christine was that she never saw it as about her. It was always about the influence that single fact would have, that the field was named after Christine Grant, a woman. The influence that had on young girls and women. You can't measure how much that meant to her.
Everything that we play for, our drive and competitiveness, it kind of all roots down to her. There have been certain games, but I know our motto has been for her, especially during our senior year when she started to get sick again. A lot of games, it was do it for Dr. Grant, push yourself harder. And then I remember, especially during the anthems, you've just done your warm-up, everything's getting a little bit nervous before a game. You're wearing your jersey with Iowa on it, and you're staring at the fans. And you kind of see Dr. Grant's name across everything, and it's even on the scoreboard, it's everywhere. And it just kind of is such a great reminder to us. We're playing something so much more than the sport itself. We're playing for Dr. Grant and everything the hard work she put in to mean that we get to stand there and play that game.
Dr. Grant sent me this voicemail on September 30th, which was the day that Iowa field hockey ascended to #1 in the National Field Hockey Coaches Poll for the first time ever.
Hello, Lisa. It's Christine Grant speaking. I just wanted to chat with you to congratulate you on an absolutely terrific year so far. It is phenomenal. Being one in the nation is unbelievable. I'll try and catch you later. Bye-bye.
Keep that one forever, for sure. I had so many visits with Dr. Grant through the years. In every visit when I was with her, I always learned something from her. And she probably, of anyone that I've ever met or interacted with in my life, she was just so very poised and very intentional about how she communicated. And she listened so intently and then communicated with even more intention. And you felt like you were the only person in the room. And I always left feeling definitely inspired, definitely calmer, and way smarter, to be quite honest.
So whenever we would be able to go together, we would look forward to these visits. And in 2016, we were, got to have lunch on the patio with her. And as time would go on, maybe she would be sitting on the couch. And as the years would go on, she would be maybe in her room and laying in her bed, and we would sit at her bedside.
And whenever I would go in, she would greet me with a really big smile and put her hand on her bed and tell me to come sit on the edge of her bed. And in her bedroom, she had a fireplace with this big mantle. And every single visit, she'd point to a couple pictures on her mantle that she could see directly from her bed. And there was one that I was in with two of the other former head coaches that were my coaches, and that was really special. And she always wanted me to look at it and grab it and take it and bring it and hold it while I sat with her on the bed.
She always knew exactly what was going on in my team and was so aware of everything that was happening within my life, and we would just kind of pick up where we last left off.
When she did go to the birdhouse in hospice this fall, in late October, we had won the Big Ten championship regular season, and she called and told me that she wanted me to bring some of the players if I thought that they could handle it.
And we just got to sit with her, and she was just beaming in her bed with proud. She was just so proud of us girls. And she took the time to just individually ask us. You know, she held her hand, and she wanted to know where our dreams and futures were going after the sport. You know, she always wanted her girls and her athletes to care about like academics too, and where your path's going to lead after. So I remember that she always made an effort to get to know us. She came to all of the practices, especially if we were going for a big trip away. She came with her fighting words to kind of lift us and boost us.
That meant the world to each one of them. And on every visit in the last 2 years when I went to see Dr. Grant, she would always tell me to come in, and she'd give me a big hug, and she just would whisper in my ear that she was proud of me, and she would say, keep persisting.
I think I'll always remember that she cared for us so much, but honestly, on the other way around, we fought every day for Dr. Grant.
Of all of my visits with her and all of my time with her, I can't even express in words what my visit with her on December 17th, and it was the last time I would visit with her, meant. Lisa and I went to that visit, both of us thinking about how women can be recognized in our nation, and how we don't have a legacy of really honoring women throughout our nation with monuments. And we were having a discussion about that, just she and I, and thinking about how maybe sometimes women don't even really want statues or monuments. Women who leave a legacy throughout their life probably want something that continues whatever cause they were fighting for. But it was weighing heavy on us to be able to really hear her thoughts on what she wanted her legacy to be, and how she felt she wanted to be remembered. We have started a wonderful program here called the Herkies, with a capital H-E-R, and it just honors women's athletics. And I brought her a t-shirt, and the 3 values of the Herkies program are support, empower, and engage, and those are written on the back of the t-shirt. And I held that up for her, and we were chatting about that, and she loved it. And I said, we're doing lots of exciting things for 50 years of Title IX. Can you believe it, Dr. Grant? And she said, no, I can't believe it's been 50 years. And I told her that what we're planning is we're planning on doing a walk. We're doing a walk for 50 minutes to signify 50 years of Title IX this year in May before a softball game. And she looked at me and she said, can I tell you something in confidence? And I said, yes. And she grabbed my hand, and we held hands, and she said, I've just been told that I will not be able to walk anymore. And so I don't think I'll be able to attend the walk. And I held her hand back, and I said, well then, if you're no longer able to walk, it's time for us to walk for you. I said, can you maybe share with me what do you want your legacy to be? You've had such an incredible impact during your life. And she said immediately, a call to action for more education. What she wanted was her life to mean that the legacy of equal opportunity for women continued, and that it wasn't over, and that there was so much work to be done to continue fighting for equal opportunities for women, especially in sport. And she said, we have so much more work to do, and it always starts with education.
Before she died, she had had several really good discussions, but the next day we were there and were talking with her, and Peg then looked and said, I think she's quit breathing. And she had. So it was really good that she had the discussions that she had the day before.
She was also incredibly proud that so much of the early work in her life and the important work of establishing the fight and the enforcement and the accountability for Title IX came from Iowa City, Iowa. And her words were, I would love for Iowa City, Iowa to be seen as the kingpin of the fight for Title IX.
Hawkeye fans, please welcome our new women's wrestling coach, Clarissa Chun.
I think if you go back in history, Iowa was first in so many things when it comes to the discussion about women's athletics. And Dr. Grant was responsible for so many of those things. And then we were able to add to that legacy going forward. But at Iowa, wrestling is known as the mecca in the world, collegiately, but beyond that. And so for us to be the first women's program, again, I think just adds to that legacy.
You know, with this university in particular, the University of Iowa, we wouldn't have athletics as we know it, most likely, without Dr. Grant, or we wouldn't be ahead of the curve in women's athletics without Dr. Grant. She fought all the battles that none of us want to fight, but somebody had to do it, and she took it on. And so we get the benefits of that now.
And we have a strong emphasis on women's athletics. Clearly, when you look around at our facilities, number one, you look around at the success of the multitude of our programs, from women's basketball.
The success we're having in soccer, the success we're having in rowing, and now adding women's wrestling.
Well, I think Christine's been a big part of that. Her role as, women's athletic director for so long has encouraged this institution to think about equity in sports in ways that other institutions haven't done.
I'm very proud of what we're doing here, the accomplishments that we've made, and what's to come in the future.
Obviously, we get to play on really the biggest stage because there isn't a lot of pro programs for women's athletics other than the WNBA. I know there's soccer as well and a few others, but I think the support for women's athletics in college is only growing and growing, and that's so exciting to see. I know we've had a few sellouts.
So I think we're getting to the point now where women's sports are recognized just as much as men's sports in terms of the fan base, and Iowa certainly has a legacy for that, but it's growing, and I'm excited about that.
I think the way people support us here is tremendous, and that's the reason you want to play basketball. You want to get your community excited about it, and that's another reason I came here, just because of the support. People in this community love our team and love really the other women's athletics teams here.
It means a lot to me to be the first coach of the University of Iowa and D1 Power 5 conference. Opens doors for a lot of young girls to choose whatever path they wanted. It wouldn't be possible without fighting for this opportunity.
Coach Bluter was hired by Dr. Grant to come here, and she has a lot of unique stories about the advice that Dr. Grant has shared with her.
She's my role model because of what she's been able to accomplish. She was my mentor because, she was somebody that I always went to for advice. She was somebody that I looked up to, that I tried to model my behaviors off of after my values. And Dr. Grant really changed the way that I think about things. And so I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful for that change of mindset because of her.
She wanted us to get to the point where we recognized that it was about the students, right? It was about young people, it was about enriching their lives and having an impact on them. So I think that's what she left me with. And every day when I walk into the building at the NCA and I go by that blue disc and I think about the platform from where I work, I think about that. What will I do today that will have a positive impact on student athletes or those who teach and lead them, coaches, administrators? And that's what drives me.
Really, her greatest legacy was the students that she had taught and how she saw them go out and succeed in their careers.
And then, of course, with the elementary school being named after her, that was the most important recognition that I think she had. I was at the luncheon when they told her that this was going to happen, and she had instant tears in her eyes, and I'd never seen that before. She had been an elementary teacher in Scotland, and she believed so much that education was the foundation of every society, and that to have a school named after a woman was an important part of that legacy.
I think her legacy is that she knew that women needed an opportunity to be able to grow and have leadership opportunities, and she saw that through sport. And she knew that any society would be that much better and reach its maximum potential when women have a seat at the table and have equal opportunities. And I think she knew that equal opportunities and leadership could come through sport. And once we allow women to have the same opportunities as men, we'll just be that much better for it.
Christine, over 50 years, certainly set the stage. But because there is still inequity, because the NCAA recently was called out on their unequal treatment of women and men basketball players, it takes vigilance and tenacity in order to keep the movement going.
Really, the fight never left Christine. I can remember having a conversation with her, and I said, Christine, I said, we are still fighting the same fight in some ways. And she said, Diane, we will always be fighting the same fight. You know, it's not going to end. That we know, we would love it to end, but it's just ongoing. We're not going to lay down. We're going to keep going.
Even at the NCAA level right now, you can see the disparities between men's and women's basketball in the tournaments. You know, I think when the NCAA tournament is happening right now, there needs to be payouts to the women's teams for being successful, as there is for the men's teams. Why is that important? Does it go directly back to the coaches and the teams? No, but it goes back to the university. One thing that I'm really proud of this year is that we had 68 teams versus 64. The men have had 68 for years, and we had 64 for years. So why was the disparity of those, you know, those 4 teams, those 60 student athletes that weren't getting the experience of having a NCAA tournament experience? So I'm glad that that changed, but there's more work to be done.
We need new young people, new student athletes, you know, here at Iowa and across the nation that say, I want to carry the flag. I want to see girls and women still have these opportunities beyond what we all already have now, maybe today. And
because of Dr. Grant and what she taught me, I feel like I need to keep fighting the fight for women's athletics. She instilled in me that, yes, she was there at the beginning, but it's the younger generation, the next generation, that has to keep pushing. Because if we're not pushing forward, we're going to fall behind again.
Dr. Grant, she built consensus, and she was a complete change agent, and you know, people heard her and they revered her messages, and that is just, I think, an unbelievable trait to have. And gosh, I wish I could do that. But I definitely, her persistence is what will stick with me.
It's unbelievable, and I just hope that it continues. Christine's worked decades to get to this point here, and I really hope they power on and keep going. Don't forget what Christine's done, please don't.
Since 1972 and since the passage of Title IX, how much women have grown in leadership roles in terms of our businesses and our corporations, at the higher education levels and administration, within, you know, politics and holding office. And you can see the effect of her advocating for that back in the early 70s and late 60s, and knowing that if we can just get women to be able to play sports equally, this will transcend our society in so many powerful ways.
I chose my career because I loved sport. But what gave me the passion
to continue to fight for equal opportunities was the unshakable belief that a sport experience can truly empower a woman, perhaps better than any other experience.